Hi again, chess enthusiasts. I did mention at the end of problem number 4 in the Soviet problem series that there once occurred a blunder in the game Alekhine versus Erva World Chess Championship match 1937, and that I would let you have a look at exactly what took place in that particular game. Well, I'm going to in just a moment, but before we get onto it, I'd just like to give a definition of a word that I've used a few times in previous videos, and that is cook. Simply, it means that there's a flaw in one's analysis. Now, this can have a triple meaning. In the first instance, it can be where the problem setter makes a mistake, and therefore his problem is completely cooked. In other words, anyone trying to solve it discovers that, in fact, there is no whatever it is, mate in 2, 3, or white to play and win, or black to play and win. It simply doesn't work out. That's seldom the case, but it can happen. Often the case is where the one who set the problem gets it right. But then somebody, like you and me, who tries to solve it, discovers that not only is there that solution, but there is another solution to it as well. And then the third instance is where somebody trying to solve it, again like you and me, thinks that he has it, and in fact he doesn't. There's a move that can spoil the broth, as it were, and in that case you have to start all over again. So that just clarifies the meaning of the word cook. Many think that it comes from a gentleman called Cook in the 19th century, but it's a little bit unclear as to exactly the complete origins of it. But anyway, it's a term that is nonetheless synonymous with chess. Just getting onto the Alekhine-Erva match, this is the position that you can see on the board at the moment. And it's the 16th game of that match. And in the end, it went to 65 moves and was a draw. Now, as you can see here, it is the position after black's 25th move, and it's queen e5 that has just been played by Dr. Erva. Now, Alekhine here could see that Erva is attacking his knight on c3, and this pawn is sort of under a threat from this bishop. It is covered by the queen, but it's hardly very well covered. So there is a bit of a problem on this queen side for the good doctor from Russia and then France. Well, the Franco-Russian clearly had in mind that he would protect the knight and eventually protect the pawn, and there's nothing wrong with that. And many I've noted online, have criticized this as a blunder. Others have said it's not a blunder. I can only repeat what Cecil Purdy said in his book on the match itself, that in his opinion, and to the horror of a lot of onlooking grandmasters at the time who were lauding the accuracy in this game, had to reverse their opinions and quickly change the reports that they were sending out to the international press, that in fact there was an oversight not once but twice. And the oversight in question is, and this is why Cecil Purdy's rule of thumb is, always check out every check. Now the check that can be administered here is queen h8 check. That would be white's 26th move. Now if he had applied that check, black clearly has no option but to take the queen, and then the knight simply comes in here to f7. So it's queen h8 check, king takes h8, knight takes f7, the pawn. Now the king then can either go to g8 or h7, it makes little difference. And then of course black picks up the queen like so. White is now 2 pawns up, but of course black can go after this pawn. So he puts the position back to white only being a pawn up. Now in this position, quite clearly, white is still in an advantageous situation. He can protect the knight by bishop b2, which is what Alekhine had in mind anyhow. And then of course black has to look at the position of his light squared bishop. Does he want to allow white to take it or not? He can, of course, whip this knight off, or he can move this bishop back so that it can't be taken. But eventually what's going to happen clearly is that white is going to come around sort of like this, or like this, and try and get back into the game. He'd probably chase away the bishop first with a3, and then if the bishop were to go here, there are possibilities here. There's a lot of active play for white here, there's no doubt about that. So, and also, if you consider that in this position, what has happened with the queen check down here and then picking up the pawn, black now has disconnected kingside pawns and only 2 of them, and white has 4 pawns. So it wouldn't be that difficult to create a pass pawn down the king side. Admittedly, white has 1 pawn against 2 on the queen side, but I think the advantage here clearly is with white. I don't think there's any question about that. So just to put this back for a moment, how it was after Dr. Erver's 25th move. Goes in there. Yep. And then just the black queen to put back. Let's make sure that we have that right. Yeah, that's okay. Now, what in fact Alekhine played here was bishop b2. Yeah, 26 bishop b2 instead of queen h8 check. I noticed some online are saying that probably Alekhine saw it and he eschewed it in favour of a line that would simplify. Well, I think this is really simplifying anyhow. What Erver played, and this is a real blunder, bishop c6, and proves that Dr. Erver certainly didn't see queen h8 check. And Alekhine didn't see it either, because what he did is he played a3. And so, like I was saying earlier, he had this formation in mind here, and he's gone ahead and played it. But what in fact he should have played definitely at this point, if he'd checked out all checks, and this is why Cecil Purdy's quite right in saying it would have been devastating this time around. So he checks king h8, he whips the pawn off at f7, the king moves back, or to h7, it matters not. Then he takes the queen. The difference this time around is that black has no time for bishop takes b4, because the light squared bishop is all prise, and that is why Cecil Purdy was quite right. So what that proves is that if Dr. Alekhine had indeed seen that, he would have played it. So he couldn't possibly have seen it, and Dr. Erver certainly didn't see it, because he wouldn't have put himself in that position had he seen it. And of course, it goes without saying that after queen e5, bishop b2, bishop c6, and then the check and everything else, if he were to take this pawn, he's not threatening the knight because it's covered by the bishop, so then white will be free to go ahead and take that off, and then he's attacking this bishop as well. So it's not really a very pleasant situation at all for black. So we'll just put it back to how it was, and we'll just go through the next couple of moves to show how Dr. Erver finally escaped and was able, without showing the rest of the game, of course, which would be a long-winded affair, how he escaped and managed to draw it. Let's just make sure that this is right. So queen e5, bishop b2, bishop c6. So Alekhine did go ahead and play a3, and then Dr. Erver played bishop d6, not deliberately to escape the nasty little check routine, but purely by accident. Neither player had seen it, and there's no way that it could ever be said that they did, because that second variation proves it. Now, this time, of course, this would not work. Well, to be sure, he picks up the pawn, yes. Okay. And then the king moves. Now this time, you see, he has to recapture the queen. But unfortunately, the bishop is there to take the knight. And so white, in winning a pawn, ends up losing a minor piece. And then that is clearly a winning position for black. So even if Alekhine had seen it at that point, he couldn't have played it because he would have ended up losing. So he played a different move, and in spite of being a pawn up, he wasn't able to capitalize on his advantage. It wasn't a pawn up in the way that it would have been, because he only had 4 pawns here against 3 with this combination not ever having been played. So that is a very interesting piece of history there, and it proves that even the greatest of players, one of the greatest players, Alekhine, he slipped up. So we must never feel bad if we do the same. And incidentally, talking further about Alekhine, when he played in the New York chess tournament of 1924, he also competed along with a lot of other chess masters in a problem-solving competition, and he was the first to complete the solutions. And so top marks for being speedy. And of course, speed chess is very entertaining. I watch a lot of it online, and I take my hat off to the players who can win games where they only have a short period of time to play, usually 5 minutes. However, in the particular case at New York 1924, Alekhine discovered that although he'd been the quickest, he hadn't solved them all. I think he missed out on a couple of them. So his answers were cooked. So we go back to the original little word and my definition for it. So as great as he was, even in 1924, leading up to his match against Capablanca, he did make a couple of mistakes there as well. So even the greatest of players make mistakes. God, of course, would play the perfect game, and I think every chess player would be very interested indeed to see the sort of openings he'd play and how he'd construct the rest of the game, and how he would deal with endgames and so forth. So that is one to think about, isn't it? The closest, I suppose, that you could get to God is the search engine, such as Stockfish. I think I'm right in saying it has an ELO rating of getting close to 4,000 ELO points. And many would say that Stockfish is better than any player alive. Well, I can tell you that I've beaten Stockfish, not in a game, but there was a problem. It was in the course of a game that had actually been played. And we arrived at a position where there was a choice of moves. And I looked at it and I thought, yep, bishop a4. And I found the next 5 moves for the remainder of the game. And Stockfish came back with bishop c4. And when Stockfish was informed that in fact in the game, it was bishop e4 that had been played in the game, by the way, so the player of this game and I were at 1 on that one, Stockfish did find the next 5 moves. But it shows you that, you know, anyone that would say that Stockfish is invincible against any human, it's not quite correct. And yet here we have a search engine that is capable of calculating millions of variations in seconds. Now, no human, not even with a photographic memory, could do that. So I was very pleased about that one. And in another matter relative to Stockfish, and it concerns the little bit of a libel case at the moment between Mr. Carlson and Mr. Newman. Now, the gentleman who is accused of cheating in that particular game, he played a move and it wasn't the strongest move in the position. And I followed this game and I looked at it. I didn't know what he'd played, and I thought to myself, well, in this position, you need to maintain contact with the piece on the F line. And this particular gentleman didn't find that move. He played a move in the same line, down the F line, but 1 square further away from it. And in the comments box, I referred to how I had found it because I believed that it was necessary to maintain contact with that piece on the F line as opposed to being a little bit adrift of it. And Stockfish found the correct move. And I was very pleased that the team that operates Stockfish replied to it and said, congratulations on finding it. So there we have a situation where if this gentleman did indeed cheat, we must ask ourselves the question, why did he not get the move that Stockfish had found? And I did. In that particular game, with all due respect to Magnus Carlsen, he did make a few mistakes, and that has been pointed out. I think, in all honesty, he had an off day, but if he has strong feelings like that, of course, then he has them. But of course, it's up to him to prove such a case, because if he can't do it, if he cannot show that the truth has been spoken there, then I'm afraid that he will be guilty of libel. He has to rely on what's called in law the defence of justification. If he can come up with that, and quite how he'd do it, I don't know. The trouble with technology is that it's superb in so many ways, but there are two aspects that I dislike about it. The obsession that people have with it. That's point number one. We need leisure time. We need downtime in something else. That's my opinion, and I have a right to exercise it, and I'm exercising it right this minute. As good as technology is, that is a problem. But also, for someone who grew up playing correspondence chess, because I grew up in a remote part of the world and we didn't have any over-the-board contact. It was as simple as that. So I had no option but to play correspondence. The correspondence game has effectively been ruined with the ability to go online and search for the right moves and get the replies. I'll say to anyone who feels that the search engine is the right way to do it, as a training tool, yes, but if you're playing an actual game against someone who is trying their best to give of themselves and not utilize the assistance of anyone, then I'm afraid that it's completely out of order. And that's what I would say about any kind of search engine on that. It's not right, and it shouldn't happen. But of course, people being people, they will, if they're in a bit of a difficult position, they'll try and get a hand. Well, I always try and solve these problems because I feel that it's the best way to do it if you want to learn. And we're all learning. Even Magnus Carlsen, I'm sure, is learning. And I understand that Magnus Carlsen does dabble in chess puzzles periodically to improve his skill. So even he realizes that he's not perfect. No one is. Only God is perfect. So Magnus out there and your opponent, I hope that you can resolve this little matter in an amicable way. It's most unfortunate that it's come up, and that I know anyone can feel a bit peeved when they lose, but you do have to be mindful that you have to prove such a thing. So best of luck in doing so. And I hope you've enjoyed this little discussion and the Alakeen games and the other comments, and we shall return to the problems in due course. Thanks very much for watching, and goodbye for now.